today. Thank you so much for coming to this session on spreading innovation in education. My name is Nicole Tucker-Smith, and I will be presenting today. We have our moderator, Melissa, who is helping me. This is my first time doing this on my own, so I thank you very much for attending, and just want to share a few things with you, some of our slides that we need to take care of here. All right, we need to first say thank you to our sponsors. Thank you, Blackboard, Collaborate in the Learning Revolution. And now this is a chance for you all to get familiar with the system and enable, let's see here, you can use the pointer to point out your location. Let me make sure I've enabled whiteboard permissions. Yep, everyone should have whiteboard permissions. Let us know where you are. I'm here in Baltimore. And it is, we've had quite a bit of rain, and we're now seeing the sun for the first time in several days. Oh, great, look, we have folks from all over. I've already said hi to Egypt and Canada, and look, here we go, great. And we have a few more people joining us. We're just taking this time to share a little bit about where we are. Some people are very happy to be here. Excellent. Okay. All right, and let's go ahead and now that we've had a moment to wave all at each other through the map, you can see I have my video up here. I will not have my video up for most of the presentation, just enough to say hi and introduce myself a bit. Going to the next slide here. This is a conversation about spreading innovation in education. This has got a little bit bumped here on the representation, but it says spreading innovation in education. And it's going to be about misconceptions and building MVPs. And I'll define what an MVP is. And at this time, I'm going to stop my video because you'll have enough to focus on with the slides. But I just want to express my sincere thanks to Melissa and Steve and Amy and the other organizers for having this conference. It's such an important talk about reinventing the classroom, because with new tools and technologies, so much more is possible now. But I'll argue that we as educators should reinvent wisely. So that's what this talk is about, and sharing a process that I've used at a school where I was an assistant principal leading professional development. And now, as the founder of LessonCast, I work with other schools to also use this process for spreading effective, innovative ideas. And the main point of it is so that all learners have access to the best that education can offer. And so just a quick background about me: I've been a teacher and a school and district administrator. As an assistant principal, that's in a middle school turnaround situation. That's what led me to developing this process, and I'm so thankful to have the opportunity to share it with you today. Throughout the session, I'll be sharing with you different links to resources that we've created, and also blog entries that go into more depth about some of the experiences that I'll share with you today. And let's dive right in here. Okay, just to give you a quick overview about the talk, we'll quickly start with 3 misconceptions that I found have often get in the way with spreading education innovation, and then I'll explain the need for an education MVP, and I'll define that acronym for us. I'll share an example of an MVP that I worked with a school to create with regarding personalized learning, and so I'll share that with you. I'll also share with you a Common Core literacy example, and then I'll talk about what it means to validate innovation, knowing that the target innovation is actually leading to desired results for students. And I'll reiterate some of the resources that we have available for sharing and spreading new and great ideas. And please, I would also add that if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to add them in the chat. I did share with Melissa that this is my first time doing this on my own, but I will try to check the chat box periodically, and then there'll also be time at the end where we can discuss any questions and in more depth. Okay. All right, and first I have to start with this disclaimer and sharing my belief that I'm not one of those doomsday promoters that talk about our failing schools, because I really do have a strong belief that there are a lot of examples of schools out there doing things right. And then my quest here is to find how can pockets of innovation that are out there then extend to any school anywhere. And so the challenge is, how do we get effective, innovative ideas to spread, and I'm going to use a word that may be controversial, scale mainstream. Now when I say scale, I don't mean blind adoption of tools or cookie cutter ideas. What I mean is, how can any school anywhere now find and apply innovative practices in a way that works for their students? So how can this be community created, community generated, inspired innovation that spreads in a way that makes sense for individual learners and individual learning communities? And I'll argue that the first step is to address 3 common misconceptions. Now I'll go through these misconceptions rather quickly because I do want to get to the meat of the presentation, and I'll share with you a link to my blog that has more detailed description about some of these misconceptions and how they play out in schools. So the first misconception here is that making current practices more efficient actually counts as innovation. And so we know that there are a lot of technology tools out there that make some of our current, more traditional and mundane classroom practices, things like taking attendance and entering grades and standardized tests. There are tools that make these practices more efficient, or in fact automate them. And while these tools are helpful, they should not be confused with innovation. And sometimes we lump all new tools with innovation, and really true innovation in education enables teachers and learners to do something new, not just faster. So we shouldn't be blinded by something that just comes out of a package and is shiny and new. Real innovation in education actually designs with the future in mind, and it doesn't simply automate an existing practice. So that's the first misconception to overcome. The second one, and this is one that many people here, part of this reinventing the classroom, are probably familiar with, is that technical training does not equal professional learning. But I find that it is important to remember that this is a misconception that some folks still have. And we know that learning how to use a new tool is not the same as understanding new ways to teach with a tool or exploring new ways for students to learn with a tool. And too often the rollout of a new tool focuses on where to point and click or tap, and it neglects the critical thinking required to truly transform learning experiences. And we see this in some of the large rollouts of new tools and technologies. Really scaling innovation or spreading innovative practices requires conversation with other educators and time for experimentation. And if we don't take the time to do this type of deep professional learning, our new tools are used in old ways. So things like document cameras are more like overhead projectors, and interactive whiteboards are primarily chalkboards. And in this example, you see that iPads sometimes are more like worksheets. And while there's nothing wrong with that, that's still not innovation. It's not letting students and teachers and learners do something new. So we need to take the time to really engage in professional learning, not just technical training. And then last but not least, this may be slightly controversial, but I have found in working with schools and in my own experience as a teacher and administrator that there's a misconception that seeing is believing. So sometimes in an attempt to spread an innovative idea, educators will work with companies to produce videos that are showcasing innovation. So they may be highly produced and everything looks great and it's innovative and students are excited and teachers are excited. And then sometimes when we show this video to another group of educators who are in the process of considering how to implement these innovative ideas, I've seen that some of the most immediate reactions are actually ones of disbelief. And so sometimes I'll hear comments like that those aren't our students and our classrooms don't look like that, and how would that work here? And what I've found is that it's just a matter of human nature. In a video clip of a classroom, what's most visible? So what we see first is often student demographics and furniture layout and equipment conditions. And then what's not visible? We don't see the instructional planning process and the built-in routines for supporting students and all the times before this when things didn't work perfectly. And so sometimes this is a lot akin to like the superstar mentality of a teacher, that things have to be perfect in order to work, and really it's an ongoing process that takes time. And when we watch a classroom, Sometimes the most visible aspects are actually the superficial things that are actually distractions. And the most important lessons to be learned are typically invisible to the naked eye. So if we are showcasing a classroom or showing a video in an attempt to spread innovation, the clip must be provided within a context that focuses our attention on the most important aspects that are essential to implementation and make sense for our learning community. So, and I'll explain a little bit more about how I actually experienced that in working with a few schools. Now, I have found one instance or exception for when seeing is believing. And that's when I, as a teacher, am able to see a peer educator in our school implementing an innovative practice and, here's the important part, getting positive results in student learning. And I found that when successful innovation happens next door and the results are tangible, then seeing plus feeling equals believing. So I've been on a bit of a quest to figure out how do we make education innovation tangible and get that seeing plus feeling equals believing effect. And I'm proposing that we need an education MVP. Let me explain what that is. So I borrowed this phrase, MVP, actually from Eric Ries's The Lean Startup. And I was exposed to this as I started working with the educator, entrepreneur community. And in his book, Eric Ries defines MVP as the minimum viable product. What's the minimum build for the maximum amount of learning? Now, when I apply this term to education, I define MVP as the minimum viable practice. And in this case, it's a clear agreement about the essential elements needed to put a new idea in place so that we can collect the maximum amount of learning about what is working or not working to improve student learning experiences. Now, it's important that this MVP is created by the community, and it facilitates a scientific process for establishing a hypothesis about what will work to help students, testing an idea, measuring impact, and iterating based on results. Now, the link that I have here is actually to a blog series that I did. I was chronicling my experience as an assistant principal trying to work through this process. So if you want to know the nitty-gritty ups and downs, you can take a look at that link and learn more about it. But now here are the most important characteristics when it comes to building an education MVP. So the first thing we need to make sure is that our education MVP is testable and replicable. So that means designing or defining clear steps for implementation so that the instructional practice can be applied effectively in multiple classrooms. So it's defining something that can be testable and then applied across classrooms. And then the next step is to make sure that the practice is tangible and malleable. So we have to concretely define the practice, but capture it in a way that it can be updated and revised because we're going to learn more about what works over time. And then finally, the education MVP has to be discrete and attributable. And by that I mean that the practice is concretely defined and it's captured in a way, it's concretely defined, and the educators are able to define metrics, so not just the practice, but define metrics to measure progress on specific student learning objectives. And we're looking to see whether or not implementing this idea helped us to increase progress along those metrics. And so that's a little bit of the theory behind it, but to put it into perspective, here's an example. So there are multiple ways to create an education MVP. But here's one school that I'm working with here in Baltimore. It's a brand new school with a brand new building, and this building is designed specifically to implement personalized learning. But the building design is less than half the battle when it comes to implementing a new way of teaching and learning. So we explored the key elements of personalized learning, and we synthesized information from different experts, and we created learning profiles for all of our students. But in the end, the educator community within the school said we need a concrete MVP that we can test and try and really learn from. So we engaged in this process of creating an MVP to define how we were going to implement personalized learning at this school. And after learning from the experts and then learning about different blended learning tools, we designed our first MVP, which you see here. It's model 1. We call it the station rotation. It's not a new model, but we wanted to define what it would look like here at our school, what it would look like in our classrooms. And then that initial MVP spun off into additional models where we looked at flex learning with centers, and we took a look at playlists as well, and we created a third model about studio learning where we had teacher-created and student-created lessons as well. And then we also had a flexible scheduling model where students could review weekly goals and adapt their schedule accordingly. And with all of these models, we really designed them based on universal design for learning principles and guidelines. And so that was really the foundation that we used to create this MVP for personalized learning at our school. Now let's see if this works. So there's a link where you can look at our MVP, but I also made it a YouTube video. So Melissa, I might ask for your help here. Amy said that I could do a web tour, and I have the link queued. Okay, so I can just push. Okay, see here.
Okay, I see the YouTube video, but I can't hear you. Okay.
Okay.
So I hear you talking in the YouTube video, but I can't.
Okay, I'm not sure if everyone could actually hear it or see it, but I did paste the YouTube video there. And it does give you an example of our communication of the MVP. So we can go back to the presentation. And I'll just, oh, you can see it in here. Oh, I'm sorry for interrupting. Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the positive response for those of you who could see it and hear it. But if you can't, I did paste the link in the chat, and I'll do it again in case you want to see it. But also, if you go to this link here, you can view the transcript of the MVP that we created and download the attachments that it was referring to. And I just wanted to share with you an example And we were exploring at the school, we were exploring a lot of theory related to personalized learning, and we were learning about all the different components, but we really had to come together. Oops. Oh, paste that link here too. You know what? I will paste all the links at the end, or actually I can paste that link here too. Hold on one second. Let me go here. One second here and I'll post it, but while I'm talking, we had to really come together and create, and I'm posting it right now. So this is the one where you can go to and actually download some of the resources that it was referring to. But we needed to come together and put down something concrete on paper, and while the station rotation model is not magic, it's not new, it was a beginning point for us to say, okay, here's how we can integrate all of these blended learning technology tools that we're trying to work through. Here's how we can look at our learner profiles in a concrete model. And it was by starting with this initial model of station rotation that we were able to get to some of the more sophisticated models for flex learning and for studio learning, where the teachers created resources and the students created resources that they could then explore and watch and build on their own. And if we had said right away that we were going to start school-wide with studio learning and flexible scheduling, then that might have been too large of an initial step. But by building this first MVP, we were able to form a clear agreement about how we were going to consistently apply innovative practices across the school in a way that made sense for our students. So that's one example at a school that was doing something a little bit out of the box. But then I also mentioned at the top of the presentation that I developed this method when I was leading the professional development for a middle school. Now this middle school was going through a turnaround situation, and so I was brought in as an administrator to lead professional development. The school had been zero-based, meaning all of the staff had to reapply for their job, and we had essentially 100 faculty, and about 50 were new to teaching, and we knew we needed to, oh, I see this question about learner profiles. Have you been at IB schools? I've not been at IB schools, but we looked at different profiles, and that might have been one of the profiles that we checked out. But we did kind of synthesize. We also looked at the UDL class profile as well, and so that informed our process. And so then at the middle school that I worked with, we were faced with a challenge where our literacy scores were not strong enough, and that was the reason for the school having to be zero-based. And so as a team, we decided that we looked at the data and we wanted students to become more strategic in their approach to comprehension. We felt like that, they were giving very rudimentary responses at the very base level of comprehension, and we wanted them to be more sophisticated in applying strategic reading strategies, especially in informational text. And so looking at the data and looking at the research that was out there, we designed these MVPs for these a series of strategies. Compare and contrast was one of them. We essentially ended up with making about 20 MVP videos, actually. And if you go to this link here, and I can post that for you in the chat gallery as well. But if you take a look there, you'll see all of the different MVPs that we created in our attempt to help students become more strategic readers. Let me paste that for you. I don't know how everybody does this multitasking, so many things on the once, but here we go. All right, one day I'm going to be an expert. Okay, here we go. So here's an example, one that we did on compare and contrast. So this is one example on compare and contrast, and our attempt was to help students become strategic thinkers across the different content areas. Anyone who works with middle school, I love middle school, it's a special place, but students are learning how all the different learning pieces come together, or at least we hope that they do, and that they're applying strategies not just in one classroom, but in a transdisciplinary fashion. And so this was one example of a strategy, and you can take a look at that example and many more. And you can also download the attachments. But I will say there was one catch to our quest for helping students become strategic learners, and the MVP helped us figure this out. So as I mentioned before, one of the main purposes of an MVP is to validate learning. And we need to know that this innovation that we're trying so hard to implement, we need to know that it's actually leading to the desired results for student learning, or knowing that we didn't get the desired results and being willing to learn more about what we need to do differently in order to make this happen. So we took our MVP, like the compare and contrast one that I showed you before, and we implemented this cycle where we would communicate the MVP across the whole school. So this is the strategy that we're working on. We really want students to be able to do this effectively across classrooms. The teachers then, they watched the MVP, and then they met with their different content areas, and they decided how they were going to put it into practice. Then we measured results, and then we would learn and iterate from it. So this is the cycle that we were doing. But then we realized along the way that we weren't getting the results that we were looking for. Our results were really up and down, and we couldn't figure out why. And the chief purpose is to use this to validate learning. Why aren't we getting our desired results? And so one teacher had the brilliant idea of having students work together on an assessment activity and require that they come to consensus in their responses. So by working together and collaboratively, we were hoping to hear their thinking. It would force their thinking out loud because they would have to communicate to one another how they were strategically solving this comprehension challenge. And so as students were working in their groups and coming to consensus, the teachers and I would float around and kind of listen, and the students were discussing the comprehension strategy and how they were applying it. One student admitted, oh, well, you know, when I was reading this passage, I didn't know what that word meant, so I skipped it. And the teacher overheard the comment and said, but you know, that word is really essential to the meaning of this passage. If you skip over it, the rest just doesn't make sense. And she responded, I know, it didn't make sense. And we realized that for some of our students, vocabulary was actually a greater barrier that we had to address before we could effectively apply the other strategies. And so we were working really hard to innovate and effectively implement something that was actually the wrong thing for some of our learners. And so many of our students needed better strategies for deciphering unfamiliar words and acquiring higher level vocabulary. And if you look at that last link that I posted in there, that will show you actually some of the vocabulary MVPs that we developed in order to meet that need. And so we pivoted and began to develop and share ideas for addressing that need as well. And so that's one of the reasons why having an MVP is so important, so that we can really test and measure and learn, and seeing that we're doing all of this effort, are we actually getting the results that we're hoping for? Is it actually making a difference for students? And our chief takeaway is that the process of spreading education innovation really requires recognizing that teachers are thoughtful learners in terms of their professional learning, but that also that learners are insightful teachers, and that quite often the key to validated learning was to listen to our students. And this required providing opportunities for students to articulate when something is or isn't working, and helping them become conscious advocates for themselves as learners. And we found that when spreading and scaling innovation and education, that everyone is a teacher and everyone is a learner. So just to recap here, this was our step-by-step process for making an MVP. And like I said, an MVP could take on multiple formats. But really everything starts with recognizing who students are and recognizing their goals for learning. And I love this comment here that someone said that's a model for the homeschoolers. Yes, excellent. And I can't tell you actually how many homeschoolers I've been working with who've been using our MVPs and doing the process and sharing with us. So thank you for sharing that information. So yes, we start with student learning goals and what they, oh, your special needs, yes. Oh, yours are special needs students, yes. And so you really have to make sure that you're addressing what they uniquely need. Thank you for sharing that. And so starting with their special needs and their learning goals, then identifying the target strategies and techniques. And so after you've identified the strategy and techniques, then you need to communicate the essential elements for implementing that practice. And so this is really where you're marrying the best practices with the learners and what you know about the classroom and communicating those essential elements. And as you are creating this joint agreement, it should be enough information so that other educators can put it into practice. And then the fourth step is to do it, to implement it, just get it out there, to do it, to try it. And then number 5 is so important because we need to reflect and talk about it, learn about what worked, what didn't work, what do we need to change, what do we need to adjust. And then number 6, learn and iterate, being willing to update and share and revise. And so the last step is to share what works, and that's what I tried to do with some of the resources that I posted here, and I'll share another slide that has multiple resources available. I want to reiterate that the MVP should be community created because you know your students, right, and what they need and how to marry innovation with best practices and the unique needs of each learner in your community. And that lastly, this MVP should continue to grow and evolve over time. So we need to make sure that we share it in a way that others can then adapt it to make it work for them. And so I think I've pasted all of these links here in the chat box here. And I would like to take this as an opportunity for any questions. So I've talked for a half an hour straight now. Thank you for indulging me. And does anyone have a question that they would like to share? Well, thank you. You are very welcome. I just appreciate having this opportunity. Have I tried this across campuses, not just in one location? So actually we do work with multiple schools, and in fact I'm about to start working with a charter network, so that will be very interesting to see how that is. And I'll probably blog about it along the way, so stay tuned to the LessonCast blog. Oh, thank you very much, and make sure you share this with others. All right, yes, and my Twitter name is @MissTuckerSmith, so thank you for following me. I will also do much better about tweeting things, so I appreciate the encouragement. And also that question about across campuses, I will say that we also work with, for example, like teacher preparation programs, so that the teaching candidates get into this process of trying a new idea and realizing that they need to learn from it. Oh yes, let me put my Twitter handle in here. @MissTuckerSmith. Yep. And so I'll look for everyone on Twitter, follow you back. And so Melissa, it may be safe, I'll stick around here, but it may be safe to end the recording. It's up to you.